On January 23rd, 2010, 12 families were getting ready to carpool to a birthday party in Wellington, Florida. 7-year-old twins Eric and Joshua Jacobson were finally going to celebrate with laser tag and go-karts. But when parents started arriving at the Jacobson home that Saturday morning, they found police tape surrounding the million-dollar property. Inside, investigators discovered a crime scene so disturbing it would haunt this wealthy gated community for years. The father, Neal Jacobson, a millionaire mortgage broker, Little League coach, and respected community volunteer with no criminal record, had murdered his wife and both sons in cold blood just hours before the party. According to everyone who knew him, he was genuinely devoted to his family, described as Father of the Year material. So, what happened? Welcome to the channel, where we look into the most perplexing true crime cases and criminal investigations. Today, we're examining the shocking murder case of millionaire Neal Jacobson and uncovering what could drive a seemingly perfect father to destroy his entire family. Let's get into it. Neal Jacobson and Frankie Solkoff met in Queens, New York, while living in the same apartment complex. Both were raised in the New York area, part of the vibrant Jewish community that defined much of the city's character in the 1980s. Neal was ambitious, driven, the kind of man who saw opportunity where others saw obstacles. Frankie was creative, warm, and nurturing. When they married, friends said they seemed perfectly matched. By the 1990s, Neal had established himself as a successful mortgage broker in New Jersey. The timing couldn't have been better. The housing market was booming, and Neal's business thrived. By the early 2000s, the family had accumulated over $2 million in cash and equity. In 2000, when Frankie gave birth to twin boys, Eric and Joshua, it seemed their lives were complete. The twins were everything to Frankie. Eric was known for his intelligence. He was a kid who loved to ask questions that adults struggled to answer. Joshua was funny, always making people laugh with his quick wit and infectious personality. Frankie channeled her love for her sons into creative projects. She co-wrote a children's book with her younger sister, Sherry Kazanchian, called Green Bean's Birthday Party, which was published in December 2009. The book followed two boys modeled after Eric and Joshua. Neal seemed equally devoted. Friends and neighbors saw him playing tag football with Eric and Joshua in the yard. He coached Little League, served on the board of the Wellington Jewish Community Center, and attended temple regularly. Dr. Henry Katz, a family friend, would later say that if someone had told him Neal was Father of the Year, he would have believed it without question. From the outside, the Jacobsons appeared to have everything. They appeared to be the perfect family. But in 2005, that future began to unravel. Neal's father became seriously ill, and Neal made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his entire life. He left his successful mortgage brokerage business in New Jersey and moved the family to Wellington, Florida, specifically to care for his ailing father. They purchased a home on South Sea Court in the Isles, an exclusive gated community, for $765,000 in March 2005. Neal's father later died in 2007, and with his death came the slow, agonizing collapse of everything Neal had built. The business ventures Neal attempted in Florida were disasters. He involved himself in gold mining operations in China, an enterprise so far outside his area of expertise that even his friends quietly wondered what he was thinking. By November 2009, records showed Neal listed as president of HGH Organics Corp., a company that sold human growth hormone over the internet. The financial hemorrhaging was catastrophic. In letters later recovered by investigators, Neal estimated the family had gone from $2.2 million in cash and equity to $2.3 million in debt in just 5 years. By early 2010, they owed about $10,000 in back taxes. The $765,000 mortgage on their Wellington home had become a crushing burden they could no longer afford. Neal confided his deepest fears to his best friend, Richard Norton. He hated himself, Norton's wife Lori would later reveal. Despite having a beautiful wife and brilliant twin sons, Neal was consumed by self-loathing over the financial mistakes he'd made. Norton kept 4 guns in his house, and Neal apparently kept the same number in his own home. Lori Norton found this concerning enough that she told Neal about a month before the murders to get rid of the guns. But Norton couldn't help his friend through the crisis. In January 2010, Richard Norton died of cancer. For Neal Jacobson, already spiraling into depression and self-hatred, The loss of his closest confidant pushed him, as Lori Norton put it, farther off his axis. When Neal attended Richard's funeral on January 15, 2010, just 8 days before the murders, all he could talk about was how stupid he'd been with his finances. On January 4th, 2010, Neal Jacobson walked into a medical clinic seeking help for what had become unbearable depression and anxiety. The doctor prescribed Zoloft, an antidepressant, and Xanax, an anti-anxiety medication. Neal had also been diagnosed with hypothyroidism, a condition that can itself cause or worsen depression. What happened over the next 19 days remains the subject of intense debate. January 23rd, 2010 was supposed to be a celebration. Eric and Joshua had turned 7 on January 19th, but the family had scheduled their birthday party for that Saturday. 12 families were invited to Fun Depot in Lake Worth for laser tag and go-karts. The day before, during one of their daily phone calls, Frankie told her sister Sherry about how excited the boys were. At approximately 6:30 that Saturday morning, while Eric and Joshua were still asleep in their bedrooms, Neal retrieved a Smith & Wesson 5-shot revolver he had hidden on the top shelf of his walk-in closet. Next to the weapon sat an open box of Winchester .38 caliber bullets and a 5-page typed letter he had composed 3 days earlier. According to his later account to investigators, Neal confronted Frankie in their bedroom, telling her it was over, that there was no other way out. Frankie pleaded desperately, saying she did not want to die, asking what would happen to their boys. Neal replied that they all had to go, that he could not leave them behind to suffer. Frankie lunged for the gun. During the struggle, her front tooth was knocked out and her index finger was sliced open. Neal shot her twice in the face, killing her. He then reloaded the revolver, placing extra ammunition and 2 speed loaders into the front pockets of his denim shorts. He walked down the hallway and entered Eric's room first, shooting the 7-year-old multiple times in the head as the child slept. Then he moved to Joshua's room and did exactly the same thing. Both first graders died in their beds without ever waking up. After the killings, Neal got into his GMC Envoy and drove away from the house. He had reportedly ingested 10 Xanax pills in what he later described as a suicide attempt. At approximately 7:30 that morning, Jamie McCanley was driving to work on US Highway 441 near Delray Beach when she observed Jacobson's GMC Envoy weaving erratically. The SUV crashed on the roadway. When emergency medical personnel arrived, they found Jacobson covered in blood with ammunition visible inside the vehicle. Neal Jacobson looked at them and said, "I killed my family." Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputies immediately responded to the Jacobson residence at South Sea Court. They forced entry and discovered Frankie, who was 53, dead in the master bedroom. Down the hallway, Eric and Joshua lay dead in their beds, shot multiple times in their heads. 12 families were supposed to arrive later that day to carpool to the birthday party. Instead, they would learn that the twin boys they'd known since birth were dead, murdered by their own father. Neal Jacobson was transported to Delray Medical Center, where Dr. Mel Cohan, ironically, one of the Jacobsons' closest friends, was on staff. He was treated for injuries sustained in the crash and formally booked at 5:30 that evening on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The news devastated Wellington. Neighbors gathered in disbelief, unable to reconcile the man they had seen playing with his children with someone capable of murdering his own family. Binks Forest Elementary School brought in grief counselors on Monday to help teachers and students process what had happened. 7-year-olds who'd sat next to Eric and Joshua in class had to be told that their friends were never coming back. The state attorney's office announced its intention to seek the death penalty, but the defense team began building a case that would challenge the assumption that Neal Jacobson had been in full control of his actions. In August 2011, they filed a notice of intent to rely on an insanity defense. They planned to argue that the combination of Zoloft, Xanax, and untreated hypothyroidism had caused involuntary intoxication or temporary insanity. Under Florida law, an exception to voluntary intoxication exists when a defendant unexpectedly becomes intoxicated by prescribed medication taken in a lawful manner. The defense had expert witnesses lined up. They had a psychologist who had examined Jacobson and concluded he had been insane at the time of the murders. But there was a problem. The defense attorneys didn't believe a jury would buy it. They worried that jurors would reject the insanity defense and recommend death. On February 27, 2012, Neal Jacobson stood before Circuit Judge Jeffrey Colbath and entered a guilty plea to 3 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm. In exchange for the plea, the state agreed not to pursue the death penalty. Judge Colbath sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, Frankie Jacobson's sister, Sherry Kazanchian, read a poem to the court. Through tears, she asked that her former brother-in-law be put to death. She and her older sister Robin wanted Neal dead, but the plea agreement was binding. From his cell at Martin Correctional Institution, Neal began filing handwritten motions for post-conviction relief. He argued that his plea was invalid because he had not been properly advised by defense counsel. He claimed his attorney should have investigated the involuntary intoxication defense more thoroughly, should have pursued the insanity defense more aggressively. The trial court denied his claims. But Neal appealed, and on July 29, 2015, the 4th District Court of Appeal reversed the trial court's summary denial of 3 of his grounds for relief. The appellate court held that Jacobson had made sufficient allegations to warrant an evidentiary hearing. The case was remanded, reopening proceedings that everyone thought were closed. For Sherry Kazanchian and her sister Robin, this was devastating. It was like forcing them to relive the nightmare. The legal proceedings dragged on for years. Then, on February 24, 2017, something unexpected happened. Neal Jacobson, now 56, appeared before Judge Laura Johnson and announced that his battle was over. He was voluntarily dropping all claims. He explained he wanted people to understand he had been a normal guy, a good father and husband with no criminal record, before suddenly going crazy and insane. He said he remained convinced that Zoloft and Xanax were to blame, but he acknowledged he did not want to risk a trial that could result in death, and he did not want to cause more pain to the victim's family. Neal Jacobson remains incarcerated at Martin Correctional Institution in Indiantown, Florida, serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is now 65 years old, but the aftermath extends beyond his imprisonment. Due to the complete financial collapse, there were no funds for burial expenses. The Star of David Cemetery donated 3 plots, and Frankie, Eric, and Joshua were interred there in 2010. However, the cemetery could not provide headstones, and the family had no money to purchase them. For over 13 years, the graves remained unmarked. In 2023, a woman who had been reading about the case in the Palm Beach Post was so moved that she and her husband decided to do something about it. They wrote a check for $3,000 to purchase gravestones. The only condition was that their identities remain anonymous. They had never known the Jacobson family. When cemetery workers went to order the memorial, they discovered there were 3 separate graves. The cemetery donated an additional $4,500 to ensure that Frankie, Eric, and Joshua each received individual footstones. On May 31, 2023, Rabbi Daniel Krimsky of Temple B'nai Jacob performed the unveiling ceremony. Standing in the cemetery on a damp Wednesday morning, he spoke about how moved he was that someone had stepped forward selflessly. He explained that in Judaism, anonymity represents the highest level of charitable giving, and that helping someone who has died represents the only truly pure act of kindness, done with no possibility of reward. Dr. Mel Kohan attended the ceremony, standing quietly as the rabbi removed the white veils from each footstone. He spoke about how emotionally difficult it was, bringing back sadness and anger, but also expressing happiness that he could participate in something positive for a family that had received such devastating destruction. Rabbi Krimsky offered prayers in Hebrew and English, praying that their memories would inspire others to live justly and kindly, that their souls would be at peace, and that they would be bound in eternal light. The case of Neal Jacobson raises profound and troubling questions. Millions of individuals take antidepressants like Zoloft and anti-anxiety medications like Xanax without incident. These drugs provide essential, often life-saving relief. But in rare cases, very rare cases, such medications can produce severe adverse reactions. Some psychiatrists have argued that SSRIs can cause extreme inner restlessness and agitation that can, in very rare cases, lead to violent behavior. Other experts strongly dispute this. What makes this case particularly difficult is that multiple factors were present simultaneously. Neal was facing catastrophic financial collapse, having lost over $4 million in 5 years. His father had died 3 years earlier. His best friend had just died days before the murders. He had untreated hypothyroidism, and he had started taking Zoloft and Xanax only 19 days before he murdered his family. The legal system concluded that, regardless of contributing factors, he remained criminally responsible. He had hidden the gun the night before. He had written a 5-page letter 3 days earlier. He had methodically killed 3 people over the course of an hour. What remains indisputable is the human tragedy. Frankie Jacobson, who loved being a mother more than anything and had just published her first children's book, died begging for her life at age 53. Eric Jacobson, a bright 7-year-old known for his intelligence, was shot to death in his bed while sleeping. Joshua Jacobson, a funny 7-year-old who made everyone laugh, was also shot to death while sleeping, hours before their birthday party. They had teachers who loved them, friends who wanted to celebrate with them, and futures that should have included decades of experiences. All of that was stolen by the person who was supposed to protect them. The question that haunts everyone is the simplest and most terrible. Why did a man with no history of violence, no criminal record, described by everyone as a loving father, suddenly murder his entire family? Was it the medication? Was it financial pressure? Was it grief from losing his father and best friend? Was it untreated mental illness? Was it all of these factors converging? Or was there something darker in Neal Jacobson all along? We want to believe tragedies like this are predictable and preventable, but sometimes terrible things happen without clear warning. Sometimes good people commit unspeakable evil. Sometimes the pressure that many face without harming anyone causes one person to destroy everything. What we are left with is the fundamental reality of what was lost. 3 people who should still be alive are dead. A family was destroyed in less than an hour on a Saturday morning that was supposed to be about birthday cake and laser tag. This case remains one of the most troubling examples of how quickly the American dream can turn into an unthinkable nightmare. 3 lives were stolen, a community was shattered, and questions still linger about what truly caused a devoted father to become a family annihilator. If this case affected you the way it affected me while researching it, consider doing what Rabbi Krimsky suggested. Perform an act of kindness today in memory of Frankie, Eric, and Joshua. It could be as simple as calling someone you love, helping a stranger, or donating to a cause that protects families in crisis. Their memory deserves to inspire something good in this world. If you found this deep dive compelling and want to see more cases like this, thoroughly researched and respectfully told, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Drop a like if you appreciate the time and effort that goes into researching these stories. And if you have suggestions for cases you want covered, leave them in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and remember, behind every true crime case are real people whose lives mattered. We owe it to them to tell their stories with the dignity and respect they deserve.